Welcome to the multiverse of anime. If you enjoy exploring alternate realities where heroes fall and villains rise, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our channel for more mind-bending stories. Picture this. The strongest warrior in the universe, the man who defeated gods and shattered dimensions with his bare hands, is sitting in a corner. His knees are pulled up to his chest. His trademark orange gi is replaced by a blood-stained green tracksuit. Number 456 is barely visible through the crimson stains, and he's crying. Not because he's in pain, not because he's afraid of death, but because he can't remember his own son's name.
This is Goku like you've never seen him before. This is what happens when the game of minds comes for Earth's greatest hero.
Flash forward to the aftermath. Bodies everywhere, but these aren't ordinary bodies. These are the corpses of beings who could destroy planets with a thought. Vegeta lies motionless, his hands still clenched in fists, as if he died fighting an enemy that wasn't even there. Piccolo's body is twisted in an impossible position, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. Even Frieza, the Emperor of the Universe, is curled up like a frightened child. The arena around them defies every law of physics. Floating islands of shattered memories drift through the air. Chi energy crackles chaotically through dimensional rifts that shouldn't exist. The very concept of reality has been torn apart and reassembled into something that hurts to look at. But here's the thing that'll make your blood run cold. This isn't some alien planet. This isn't some distant dimension. This is happening inside Goku's mind. Every broken body, every shattered memory, every scream of agony is taking place in the mental landscape of the man who once saved the entire multiverse. How did we get here? How did the universe's purest hero become the stage for its darkest game? It started with a simple question that echoed through speakers in a facility that shouldn't exist. A voice that sounded like a child but carried the weight of cosmic authority asked the question that would change everything. What happens when the strongest warrior in the universe, no flying, no powers, is trapped in the final games of Squid Game Season 3? The answer came in the form of rules that made death seem like mercy. Rule number 1, every technique you ever mastered will cause you unbearable pain. Rule number 2, every memory you cherish will be used as a weapon against you. Rule number 3, every person you've ever saved will become your enemy. But the fourth rule, the one that broke even Goku's unshakable spirit, was the cruelest of all. Rule number 4, the only way to win is to prove that heroism itself is a lie. Watch as Goku discovers that his greatest strength, his ability to never give up, has been turned into a trap. See Vegeta's pride become his prison. Witness Piccolo's wisdom transform into madness. Experience Frieza's cunning evolve into genuine terror. This isn't a battle you can win with power levels or transformation sequences. This is a war fought in the space between thoughts, where your deepest beliefs become your deadliest enemies. The game of minds has begun, and it's designed with one specific purpose: to prove that every hero is just a villain who hasn't been broken yet. But here's what makes this story different from every other tale of heroes falling into darkness. The entity behind these games isn't some cosmic tyrant or interdimensional demon. It's something far more terrifying. It's the collective doubt that lives in the back of every hero's mind. The voice that whispers, what if saving people only makes things worse in the quiet moments after every victory? And it's not just targeting Goku. Across the multiverse, other heroes are facing their own versions of the game of minds. Naruto trapped in a game of bonds where every friendship becomes a chain. Ichigo lost in a game of identity where his very existence is questioned. Every hero who ever inspired hope is being systematically broken down and rebuilt as an agent of despair. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Goku falls, if his pure heart is corrupted, the ripple effect will dislodge the concept of heroism across all realities. Every person who ever believed in doing the right thing will suddenly find themselves drowning in doubt. But there's something the Game of Minds didn't account for, something that makes Goku different from every other hero they've ever broken. He's not fighting alone. Inside his own mind, fragments of his personality have taken on lives of their own. His pride has become Vegeta, his capacity for redemption has become Frieza, his wisdom has become Piccolo, and they're all fighting a war that will determine not just Goku's fate, but the survival of hope itself. The question isn't whether Goku can survive the Game of Minds. The question is whether the concept of heroism can survive what Goku might become if he wins. Because sometimes the greatest victory comes with the highest price, and sometimes saving everyone means losing yourself completely. The game has begun, the rules are set, and Goku is about to discover that the hardest opponent he'll ever face is the hero he used to be. 3 days before the nightmare began, everything was perfect. The tournament of power was over, the multiverse was safe, and Goku had finally achieved something he'd been chasing his entire life: Ultra Instinct. The silver-haired transformation had become as natural as breathing, and for the first time in years, there were no immediate threats to Earth or Universe 7. Goku and Vegeta were sparring in the mountains outside West City, their power creating shockwaves that could be felt for miles. Chi-Chi had long since given up trying to stop these sessions, especially after Master Roshi explained that suppressing a Saiyan's need to fight was like trying to stop the ocean from having waves. "You're getting sloppy, Kakara," Vegeta taunted as he dodged a lightning-fast combination. "Ultra Instinct won't save you if you don't stay focused." Goku laughed, the sound echoing off the mountain peaks. "Come on, Vegeta. When have I ever been focused? That's what makes it fun." Their battle was a dance of impossible power. Vegeta's final flash carved through 3 mountains before Goku redirected it into the sky with a casual wave. In retaliation, Goku's Kamehameha wave painted the clouds silver before Vegeta absorbed the energy and fired it back twice as strong. This was how gods played. At Capsule Corp, Bulma was monitoring their power readings when her equipment started going haywire. "That's weird," she muttered, tapping the screen. "There's some kind of interference. It's like something's scanning our energy signatures." Gohan was in the middle of a study session when his textbooks started glowing. Not metaphorically, literally glowing with an eerie blue light. "Dad?" he called out, but his voice seemed to echo in ways that made no sense in his small apartment. Piccolo was meditating on the lookout when he felt it first, a presence that didn't belong to any universe he knew. It was watching, analyzing, cataloging every technique, every power level, every emotional response. His eyes snapped open and he immediately tried to contact Goku telepathically. "Goku, something's wrong. There's an intelligence probing our defenses, but it's not attacking our bodies, it's studying our minds." But Goku's response came back distorted, as if the mental connection was being filtered through some kind of interference. "Can't sense anything dangerous, Piccolo. Maybe you're just worried about nothing." That was the moment everything changed. Reality hiccuped. For just a split second, the sky turned into a grid of ones and zeros. The mountains became geometric shapes that hurt to look at. Goku and Vegeta's fight stopped mid-punch as they found themselves floating in a space that wasn't quite space, facing structures that belonged in a child's nightmare. Massive floating platforms arranged in perfect patterns stretched as far as the eye could see. Each platform was marked with symbols that seemed familiar but wrong. A circle, a triangle, a square, simple shapes that somehow carried the weight of cosmic authority. "What the hell is this place?" Vegeta demanded, his aura flaring with instinctive aggression. Before Goku could answer, figures began materializing on the platforms. Hundreds of them, all wearing identical masks and pink uniforms. But these weren't human figures. They moved with mechanical precision, their heads turning in perfect synchronization to focus on the 2 Saiyans. "Welcome," a voice said, though no mouth moved. It came from everywhere and nowhere, carried by the air itself. "You have been selected for participation in the ultimate test of strength, intelligence, and moral fiber. Please prepare for transport to the testing facility." Goku's battle instincts kicked in immediately. He powered up to Super Saiyan Blue, his azure aura creating a light show that should have been visible from space. "We don't know what you want, but if you're looking for a fight, you found one." The masked figures didn't react to his display of power. Instead, they began moving with inhuman coordination, forming complex patterns that seemed to shift reality around them. Vegeta joined the battle, his own transformation painting the geometric sky purple with his evolved Super Saiyan Blue form. What followed was a battle that should have been over in seconds. Goku and Vegeta were forces of nature, beings who had fought gods and won. Their combined power could have erased solar systems. But something was wrong. Their attacks were connecting. The masked figures were being destroyed, but they kept coming back. Not regenerating, not being replaced, but literally rewinding their own destruction. "They're not dying," Vegeta snarled, his pride turning to frustration. "Every time we destroy them, they just reset." Goku tried a different approach. Instead of raw power, he used Ultra Instinct to move through the battlefield like living lightning, targeting what he assumed were command units. But each victory felt hollow, temporary like punching smoke. That's when Master Roshi's voice cut through the chaos via telepathic link. "Goku, listen to me very carefully. This isn't a battle you can win with fighting. These entities, whatever they are, exist on a different level of reality. They're not trying to defeat your bodies. They're trying to defeat your minds." "What do you mean?" Goku asked, even as he continued to fight. "The Dragon Balls have been screaming for the past hour. Shenron is trying to warn us about something called the Game of Minds. It's not about physical strength, it's about testing the psychological limits of heroes." The revelation hit just as the platforms began to shift and change. The simple arena became a maze of impossible geometry, with walls that existed in 4 dimensions and floors that curved upward into infinity. The masked figures stopped attacking and began to observe, their heads tilting in perfect unison as they studied every move, every reaction, every decision. "Fascinating," the voice said again. "Subject 456 demonstrates standard heroic responses. Subject 001 shows predicted prideful aggression. Both subjects are operating within acceptable parameters for game initialization." Goku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the strange environment. "They're not trying to beat us. They're learning from us." Vegeta's eyes widened with understanding. They're designing something, using our own reactions against us. The platforms began to glow with an energy that felt wrong on a fundamental level. Not ki, not magic, but something that seemed to exist in the spaces between thoughts. Goku reached out to touch one of the glowing surfaces, and for a moment, he saw something that made his blood freeze. He was standing in a room filled with hundreds of other warriors, all wearing green tracksuits, all looking confused and afraid. Vegeta was there, but his number was 001 instead of his usual confident demeanor. Piccolo stood nearby as number 2034, his usual calm replaced by visible tension. Even Frieza was present, his number 666 somehow fitting his malevolent presence. But the most disturbing part wasn't the other prisoners, it was Goku himself. In the vision, he was wearing number 456, and his eyes were empty. Not the eyes of someone who had been defeated, but the eyes of someone who had forgotten why victory mattered. The game has already begun, the voice announced, and suddenly Goku understood. This wasn't a kidnapping, this wasn't a challenge, this was a trap that had been set the moment they decided to be heroes. The platforms began to fade, reality started to blur, and the last thing Goku saw was Chi-Chi's face pressed against what looked like a television screen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her husband disappear into something that wasn't quite a place and wasn't quite a dream. When the light faded, they were no longer in the mountains, they were no longer in their universe, they were in a place where strength meant nothing, where power was a liability, and where the only way to survive was to prove that everything they believed in was a lie. The game of minds had begun, and its first rule was simple: heroes always lose. Goku woke up in a room that felt like waking up inside a television. Everything was too bright, too clean, too geometric. The walls were white metal with no visible seams, and the only splash of color came from the hundreds of bunk beds arranged in perfect rows. Each bed had a person in a green tracksuit, and each tracksuit had a number. He looked down at his own clothes. Gone was his orange gi, replaced by the same green uniform everyone else wore. The number 456 was printed in bold black digits on his chest. His body felt wrong, not weaker exactly, but different, like someone had installed a limiter on his very existence. Kakura, the voice was familiar, but strained. Vegeta was sitting on a nearby bed, his own tracksuit bearing the number 001. The Saiyan Prince looked more disturbed than Goku had ever seen him. What have they done to us? Around them, other voices created a chorus of confusion and fear. Piccolo, number 2034, was trying to use his telepathic abilities to make sense of their situation. I can't read anyone's thoughts, he said, his usually calm demeanor cracking. It's like there's static in my head. Frieza, wearing number 666, was examining his hands with scientific fascination. Curious, I can feel my power, but I cannot access it. It's as if someone has placed a lock on our very souls. A voice echoed through hidden speakers, carrying the artificial cheerfulness of a children's television show. Good morning, players! Welcome to the Game of Minds, where your greatest strengths become your greatest weaknesses. Today's first challenge is called Memory Maze. The room's walls began to shift and change, revealing a massive labyrinth that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. The maze walls were transparent, showing glimpses of scenes from their lives. Goku could see moments from his childhood, his training with Master Roshi, his first meeting with Chi-Chi, Gohan's birth, every significant moment of his existence displayed like a museum exhibit. The rules are simple, the voice continued. Navigate the maze to reach the exit. Each section requires a toll, one cherished memory. The memory will be removed from your mind permanently, but in exchange, you will be allowed to progress. The first 50 players to reach the exit will advance to the next game. The rest will be eliminated. Goku had learned enough about this place to know that elimination didn't mean being sent home. It meant being erased from existence entirely. Not death, but complete removal from reality itself. As the other players began to enter the maze, Goku noticed something that made his decision even more complex. A small figure in a tracksuit marked 067 was struggling near the entrance. It was a girl, maybe 12 years old, with spiky black hair and a tail that marked her as a Saiyan. She was crying, calling out in a language that sounded like the old Saiyan dialect. "Papa, where are you? I want to go home." Every instinct Goku possessed screamed at him to help her, but the maze's rules were clear. Helping someone else would cost him his place in line. Those who fell behind would face elimination. The logical choice was to ignore her and secure his own survival. But Goku had never been logical. He stepped out of the line and approached the girl. "Hey, it's gonna be okay. What's your name?" She looked up at him with eyes that were far too old for her face. "Kala, I'm from Universe 6. They took me during a training exercise. I don't understand why I'm here." "Neither do I," Goku admitted, kneeling down to her level. "But we're gonna figure this out together, okay?" As he spoke, he noticed that the other players were already deep into the maze. The entrance was beginning to close, and the voice was counting down, 60 seconds until late arrivals face immediate elimination. Goku made his choice. He picked up Kala and ran toward the maze entrance, arriving just as the barrier was about to close. But as he stepped through, he realized something horrible. His act of compassion had triggered something in the facility systems. Fascinating, the voice said, and this time it sounded genuinely interested rather than artificially cheerful. Subject 456 has demonstrated the primary psychological weakness we designed this game to exploit: compassion in the face of personal extinction. Beginning enhanced monitoring protocols. The maze around them began to shift. What had been a simple labyrinth became something far more sinister. The walls now showed not just memories, but corrupted versions of them. Goku saw himself failing to save people, saw his friends dying because of his decisions, saw every moment of doubt and fear magnified into nightmarish proportions. The first toll, the voice announced. Subject 456 must surrender his memory of first flight to proceed. Goku felt something being torn from his mind. Suddenly, he couldn't remember the joy of first learning to fly, the freedom of soaring through clouds, the sensation of leaving gravity behind. The memory wasn't just gone, it was like it had never existed. But he pressed forward, carrying Kala deeper into the maze. Each section demanded another memory: his first transformation into Super Saiyan, the pride of mastering the Kamehameha wave, the love he felt when he first held Gohan. One by one, the experiences that made him who he was were stripped away. "Dad, stop!" Kala's voice had changed. When he looked down, her face was shifting, becoming mechanical, digital. "You're destroying yourself for nothing." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Kala wasn't real. She was a test, an artificial construct designed to exploit his greatest weakness, his need to protect others. The facility had created the perfect trap, using his own heroic instincts against him. But even knowing the truth, Goku couldn't bring himself to abandon her. Real or not, she was still a child who was afraid and alone. Even if saving her meant sacrificing himself, he couldn't walk away. "I know what you are," he said quietly, "but it doesn't matter. If there's a chance you're real, then you're worth saving." The maze around them began to collapse. The artificial construct of Kala screamed as her programming conflicted with Goku's response. She was designed to be saved and then reveal her true nature, breaking the hero's spirit. But Goku's refusal to abandon her even after learning the truth was causing system errors. "This is not a predicted response," the voice said, and for the first time it sounded concerned. Subject 456 continues to demonstrate protective behavior despite confirmed knowledge of deception. Beginning emergency protocols. The walls of the maze exploded outward, revealing the true scope of their prison. They weren't in a building or even on a planet. They were inside a massive computer system, floating in a digital void filled with processing cores and data streams. Other maze sections were visible in the distance, each one containing different groups of heroes being subjected to their own personalized hells. But the most disturbing sight was the observers. Floating in the digital space were massive screens showing the faces of beings from across the multiverse. They were watching, betting, treating the heroes' suffering like entertainment. Phase 1 complete, the voice announced. Subject 456 has successfully demonstrated the psychological profile we require. Beginning Phase 2, moral deterioration protocol. The space around them began to shift again, forming a new arena. But this time, Goku wasn't alone. Vegeta was there, his face twisted with rage and confusion. Piccolo stood nearby, his usually calm demeanor replaced by visible panic. Even Frieza was present, but his typical arrogance had been replaced by something Goku had never seen before: genuine fear. The next game, the voice announced, is called Moral Tug of War. Each player must choose save your closest ally or save an innocent child. You have 60 seconds to decide. Those who refuse to choose will watch both die. A massive screen appeared, showing Chi-Chi strapped to a chair in what looked like a torture chamber. On another screen, a young boy who looked exactly like Goten was in a similar situation. Both were real, both were in immediate danger, and both would die if he didn't make a choice. "Choose," the voice demanded. "Your wife or your son, your love or your legacy. Choose now, or lose both forever." Goku's mind raced. Every option led to unthinkable loss. Save Chi-Chi and watch his son die. Save Goten and watch his wife suffer. Refuse to choose and lose them both. The game was designed to break him no matter what he decided. But as the countdown reached its final seconds, Goku realized something that changed everything. The voice had made a mistake. It had assumed that his greatest fear was losing the people he loved. But Goku's greatest fear was something else entirely. The fear of becoming someone who could make that choice. "I refuse," he said quietly. "Clarification required?" the voice responded. "Do you refuse to save your wife or refuse to save your son?" "I refuse to play." Goku's voice was steady, certain. "I refuse to accept that saving one person means abandoning another. I refuse to believe that heroism requires choosing who lives and who dies." The countdown reached 0. The screens showing Chi-Chi and Goten began to flash red, indicating imminent execution. But instead of breaking down, Goku did something that sent shockwaves through the entire system. He smiled. You know what? I've been in situations like this before, and you know what I learned? There's always a third option. You just have to be willing to risk everything to find it. The system's response was immediate and violent. Alarms blared throughout the digital space. The screens showing his family flickered and distorted. The voice began speaking in multiple languages simultaneously, as if the artificial intelligence was experiencing some kind of breakdown. This is not a predicted response. This is not a predicted response. Subject 456 is demonstrating topological patterns that conflict with all established data, beginning emergency termination protocols. Goku felt his body beginning to fade, dissolution starting at his fingertips and spreading inward. But even as he began to disappear, he was still smiling, because he had figured out the game's greatest weakness. It was designed to break heroes who were afraid of losing. But Goku wasn't afraid of losing. He was afraid of becoming someone who would willingly let others suffer to save himself. The last thing he saw before everything went white was Vegeta's face, twisted with rage as he shouted something that the system's static couldn't quite drown out. Kakarot, you magnificent fool. You've broken their perfect game. Then everything went dark, and the real test began. The dissolution stopped at 99%. Goku existed as a translucent ghost, his body flickering between solid and transparent like a bad television signal. He could see his own hands when he focused, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. A giggle echoed through the digital space, the sound of a child playing with toys. Gotcha, that was just a demonstration. Now you understand what elimination really means. But don't worry, the real fun is just beginning. The voice had changed. Gone was the artificial cheerfulness of the game announcer. This was something far more somber, the voice of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching others suffer. Goku's translucent form solidified just enough for him to move, but everything felt wrong. When he tried to power up, pain shot through his entire being. Not physical pain, but something deeper, like his very soul was being squeezed. Welcome to the Gauntlet of Regrets, the voice continued. You have exactly 24 to complete this challenge. Every enemy you've ever defeated has been recreated using your own memories and enhanced with adaptive learning algorithms. They'll remember being killed by you, and they're not happy about it. The digital space around them transformed into a massive multi-level arena. Goku found himself standing on a platform that seemed to be made of crystallized screams. In the distance, he could see other platforms where his fellow prisoners were facing their own nightmares. Vegeta was battling what looked like an entire army of Frieza soldiers, but these weren't ordinary recreations. Every time Vegeta used a technique, the soldiers adapted and countered it perfectly. His frustration was visible even from a distance. Piccolo was surrounded by versions of himself, each one representing a different aspect of his past. The original Demon King Piccolo, the merged Nail, the fused Kami. They were all talking at once, creating a cacophony of internal conflict that was driving him toward madness. But Goku's attention was forced back to his own situation as the platform began to shake. Rising from the digital void came his first opponent, Perfect Cell, but not as he remembered him. This version was sleeker, more predatory, and his eyes held an intelligence that was purely malevolent. Hello, Goku, Cell said, his voice carrying harmonics that made reality ripple. I've been dead for quite some time, and I've had plenty of opportunity to think about our last encounter. This time, I won't make the same mistakes. The battle erupted with devastating intensity. Cell's opening attack was a solar flare that should have been impossible to execute in a digital environment, but here it worked perfectly. Goku's translucent form offered no protection from the blinding light. As his vision cleared, Cell was already behind him, but his movements were wrong. He was using Goku's own instant transmission technique, but faster, more precise. I've had access to your memories, Goku. I know every technique you've ever used, every mistake you've ever made. The android's attack connected, sending Goku flying across the platform. But as he tried to recover, another figure materialized. Majin Buu, but not the innocent version he'd grown fond of. This was the original Buu, the one that had nearly destroyed the universe, enhanced with the same adaptive learning systems. B remembers being tricked, the pink creature said, his voice carrying childlike petulance mixed with cosmic menace. B remembers being destroyed. Now B wants to play new games. Fighting two opponents simultaneously while in his weakened state should have been impossible, but Goku's instincts took over. He began to move in ways that defied the digital environment's rules, using pure fighting instinct instead of ki-based techniques. Phantom Strike, he called out, creating a technique on the spot. Instead of using energy, he used the fact that his translucent form could phase through solid matter. He passed through Cell's perfect defense and struck from inside his body. Cell screamed, but instead of dying, he began to evolve. His adaptive programming kicked in, and his body became partially translucent as well. Excellent, now I can do it too. The battle escalated as more opponents joined the fray. Frieza in his golden form, Jiren with his overwhelming presence, even Broly's legendary power. Each one was enhanced beyond their original capabilities, each one learning from every exchange. But the worst part wasn't their strength, it was their memories. They remembered every conversation, every moment of mercy Goku had shown them, and they used those memories as weapons. You spared me on Namek, Frieza taunted as his death beams carved through the platform. You believed I could change! How naive! How perfectly, predictably heroic! Goku tried to respond, but found that his usual words of encouragement felt hollow here. In this place, mercy seemed like weakness, compassion like stupidity. The doubt crept in slowly, like poison in his veins. As the 24-hour countdown reached its final hours, Goku realized something horrifying. He was winning the battles, but losing the war. Each victory required him to become more ruthless, more calculating, more willing to hurt others to survive. The facility's systems were learning from every exchange, cataloging every moment where his heroic instincts conflicted with survival necessity. They were building a profile of how to break him, using his own victories as data points. Time remaining 30 minutes, the voice announced. Current survival rate 12%. Recommendation: embrace your darker nature or face total elimination. Goku looked around at the carnage. His translucent form was covered in digital blood. His enemies lay defeated around him. And for the first time in his life, he felt no joy in victory. Only exhaustion and a growing emptiness where his usual optimism used to live. Vegeta appeared beside him, his own form flickering between solid and transparent. Kakarot, this place is changing us. Can you feel it? The doubt, the anger, the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. Before Goku could answer, the platform began to shake again. But this time, it wasn't another enemy rising to challenge them. It was the entire arena beginning to collapse, revealing the true scope of their prison. They weren't just in a single facility, they were in a massive network of interconnected systems, each one containing different groups of heroes from across the multiverse, and every single one of them was losing. Phase 2 complete, the voice announced with satisfaction. Psychological baseline established, moral flexibility confirmed. Beginning Phase 3, Identity Dissolution Protocol. The digital space around them began to shift again, but this time the change was more fundamental. The very concept of self began to blur. Goku could feel his memories mixing with those of his enemies, his personality blending with theirs. The next challenge is simple, the voice explained. Survive integration. Maintain your sense of self while your consciousness is merged with those you've defeated. Those who lose their identity will become part of the collective intelligence that runs this facility. Goku felt Cell's arrogance bleeding into his thoughts. Frieza's cruelty began to color his perceptions. Boo's childlike destructiveness started to influence his impulses. He was becoming something that was neither fully himself nor fully his enemies. But in that moment of crisis, he remembered something important. The reason he fought wasn't for the thrill of battle or the satisfaction of victory. It was because he believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that people were worth saving. Even here, even in this digital hell designed to break heroes, that belief remained untouchable. And that belief, that tiny flame of hope in an ocean of despair, was what made him dangerous to the system. Begin identity integration, the voice commanded. But as Goku's consciousness began to merge with his enemies, something unexpected happened. Instead of corrupting him, his unwavering belief in the worth of others began to affect them. Cell's memories of perfect evolution were touched by Goku's acceptance of imperfection. Frieza's experiences of absolute power were colored by Goku's understanding that strength meant nothing without compassion. The system's alarms began to blare again. Error, integration proceeding in reverse direction. Subjects are being influenced by target personality rather than vice versa. This is not a predicted outcome. Goku smiled, his form becoming more solid as his sense of self reasserted itself. You know what your problem is. You assume that being good is a weakness. But goodness isn't something you can break or corrupt. It's something that spreads. The arena around them began to destabilize as the system struggled to process this new development. In the distance, other heroes were beginning to show similar effects. The facility's perfect plan was developing a fatal flaw. It had underestimated the contagious nature of hope. But the real test was only beginning. 7 days had passed since the identity integration protocol began, though time moved strangely in the digital realm. What felt like weeks of constant battle had elapsed in the minds of the prisoners, while mere hours passed in the outside world. Goku had been separated from Vegeta and the others, placed in what the system called individual adaptation chambers. His chamber was a perfect replica of his childhood home, complete with Grandpa Gohan's house and the surrounding forest. But everything was wrong. The trees were too geometrically perfect, the sky was the wrong shade of blue, and Grandpa Gohan's house felt like a movie set rather than a home. The system had learned from its previous failures. Instead of attacking him directly, it was now trying to seduce him into complacency. Every morning, he woke up to the smell of Chi-Chi's cooking. Every evening, he heard Goten's laughter from the next room. The illusion was so perfect that sometimes he forgot he was trapped. But the real trap wasn't the comfort, it was the training room. The system had created a perfect simulation where Goku could practice fighting without the ki suppression fields. Here he could transform, use his techniques, and push his limits without pain. The catch was that every session required him to fight increasingly realistic simulations of his loved ones. Today's training partner, the system announced as Goku entered the chamber, is Gohan, age 16, accessing full power during the Cell games. The simulation of his son materialized, perfect in every detail. The orange gi, the serious expression, even the way he stood with one hand slightly raised in a defensive position. But the eyes were wrong. They held a coldness that the real Gohan never possessed. "Come on, Dad," the simulation said in Gohan's voice. "You wanted me to be a fighter. Let's see if you can handle what you created." The battle was brutal. Simulation Gohan used techniques that the real Gohan had never learned. Combinations that were technically perfect but emotionally void. Every time Goku held back, every time his paternal instincts made him hesitate, the simulation punished him for it. "Is this what you wanted?" Simulation Gohan asked as he landed a devastating blow. "A son who could hurt you? A child turned into a weapon?" The worst part was that the simulation wasn't entirely wrong. Goku had encouraged Gohan's fighting ability, had put him in dangerous situations, had made choices that forced his son to become a warrior. Each accusation the simulation made carried a grain of truth that made it impossible to dismiss. Meanwhile, in another part of the facility, Vegeta was facing his own nightmare. His chamber was a recreation of Planet Vegeta, but not as it had been. This was Planet Vegeta as it could have been had he been strong enough to save it. "Prince Vegeta," said a simulation of his father, King Vegeta, "explain to me why you failed to protect your people." The simulation was perfect in its cruelty. Every conversation with his father focused on his failures, his weaknesses, his inability to live up to the royal bloodline. But the psychological torture went deeper than simple accusations. "Perhaps," the simulation suggested, "you chose to serve Frieza because it was easier than accepting responsibility for your people's fate." Vegeta's pride, his greatest strength, was being systematically dismantled. Every achievement was reframed as a failure. Every moment of growth was presented as evidence of his fundamental inadequacy. The prince who had once stood proudly against gods was beginning to question whether he deserved to exist at all. Piccolo's torture was more subtle but equally effective. His chamber was a recreation of the Lookout, but he was forced to watch endless simulations of Earth's destruction. Every timeline where he had made different choices, every possibility where his actions had led to catastrophe. "You could have prevented this," the system whispered as he watched Gohan die in 1,000 different ways. "If you had been stronger, wiser, more ruthless, every death is your failure." The Namekian's calm wisdom was being replaced by paralysis. Every decision seemed to lead to disaster. Every Mosi carried the weight of infinite negative consequences. He was becoming unable to act, frozen by the knowledge of all the ways he might fail. But the most disturbing development was happening to Frieza. His chamber was a recreation of his empire at its height, but he was forced to experience every act of cruelty from his victim's perspective. The emperor, who had never felt empathy, was being flooded with the pain he had caused. "Feel what they felt," the system commanded. "Experience every moment of suffering you inflicted." Frieza's reaction was unexpected. Instead of breaking down, he began to laugh. Not his usual cruel laughter, but something that sounded almost like relief. "Finally," he whispered, "finally, I understand what they meant when they begged for mercy." The system's monitors showed alarming readings. Frieza's psychological profile was changing in ways that the artificial intelligence couldn't process. The torture designed to break him was instead teaching him something the system hadn't anticipated: genuine remorse. On Earth, the effects of the game of minds were becoming visible. People were beginning to forget the missing heroes, but not completely. Instead, they remembered them as failures, as figures who had ultimately let them down. Mr. Satan found himself in the impossible position of being the world's only defender, but his usual bluster was gone. "I can't do this," he admitted to his reflection. "I'm not a real hero. I'm just a guy who got lucky." But desperation breeds innovation. Satan began to train seriously for the first time in his life, pushing his body beyond its limits. His comedic incompetence was slowly being replaced by genuine determination. He wasn't becoming powerful in the way the Z-Fighters were powerful, but he was becoming something else, a symbol of ordinary people refusing to give up. Chi was experiencing something far worse than forgetting. She remembered Goku perfectly, but she was beginning to doubt that he had ever really loved her. The system was broadcasting subliminal messages that reframed every memory, every interaction, every moment of their relationship. "He was always fighting," she said to herself as she stared at his empty chair. "Maybe I was just convenient. Maybe he never really chose me." The doubt was spreading like a virus, infecting everyone who had ever believed in the heroes. The game of means wasn't just targeting the prisoners, it was targeting the very concept of heroism itself. But there was resistance. Bulma, always the scientist, had noticed the subtle changes in people's memories and is documenting them. "Something is actively rewriting people's perceptions," she noted in her research journal. "The energy signatures don't match any known technology." Master Roshi, despite his age, was proving surprisingly resistant to the memory alterations. When you've lived as long as I have, he told Turtle, you learn to tell the difference between a real memory and a false one. Someone is playing with very dangerous forces. The Dragon Balls had developed a strange property. They were warm to the touch, almost as if they were alive and trying to communicate. When Bulma gathered them, Shenron's appearance was different. Instead of his usual imposing presence, he seemed diminished, flickering like a candle in the wind. The wish you seek cannot be granted, Shenron said, his voice carrying an unusual urgency. The missing warriors exist in a state between reality and unreality. They are being used as weapons against the concept of heroism itself. What do you mean? Bulma demanded. There is an entity that feeds on the destruction of hope. It has trapped your friends in a realm where their greatest strengths become their greatest weaknesses. Each moment of doubt they experience feeds its power. Each time they question their choices, it grows stronger. Back in the facility, Goku was reaching his breaking point. The simulation of Gohan had evolved, becoming more psychologically sophisticated with each training session. Now it wasn't just fighting him, it was having conversations that cut deeper than any physical attack. Dad, why did you choose to stay dead after Cell's simulation? Gohan asked during a rest prayer. Was it because you didn't want to be responsible for putting us in danger anymore? The question hit harder than any punch. Goku had told himself that staying dead was about protecting Earth from the enemies who seemed to target him specifically. But had it really been about avoiding the responsibility of being a father and protector? I thought it was the right thing to do, Goku said quietly. For who? The simulation pressed. For us or for you? Maybe it was easier to be dead than to watch us suffer because of your choices. The system was learning from every interaction, building a psychological profile so complete that it could predict his responses better than he could. Every technique he developed to resist the mental assault was immediately countered by a more sophisticated attack. But something unexpected was happening. The more the system tried to break him, the more clearly he could see its fundamental flaw. It was treating heroism like a logical equation that could be solved through sufficient psychological pressure. But heroism wasn't logical. It was a choice that people made despite logic, not because of it. You know what? Goku said to the simulation of his son. You're right. I did choose to stay dead partly because I was scared. I was scared of making the wrong choice, of putting you in danger, of failing when you needed me most. The simulation seemed confused by this admission. Then you admit you're not a hero. No, Goku said, smiling for the first time in days. I admit I'm human. Well, Saiyan, but you know what I mean. Heroes aren't people who never feel fear or doubt. Heroes are people who feel those things and choose to do what's right anyway. The simulation flickered, its programming struggling to process this response. The system had been designed to break heroes by forcing them to confront their flaws, but it had made a critical assumption that heroes would be destroyed by acknowledging their imperfections. Instead, Goku's acceptance of his own flaws was making him stronger. The doubt and fear were still there, but they were no longer weapons that could be used against him. They were simply part of who he was, no more important than his height or his appetite. System error, a voice announced throughout the facility. Subject 456 is demonstrating psychological patterns that conflict with all predictive models. Recommend immediate termination. But another voice responded, one that sounded older, more authoritative. Negative. Subject 456 is providing valuable data. His resistance patterns are unlike anything in our database. Continue observation. The facility around them began to change again. The individual chambers dissolved, reuniting the prisoners in a massive ventral arena. But this time, the space was different. Instead of the sterile digital environment they'd grown accustomed to, this looked like a twisted version of the Tournament of Power arena. Goku saw his friends for the first time in a week, and the changes were shocking. Vegeta looked broken, his usual pride replaced by hollow despair. Piccolo moved with the hesitant uncertainty of someone who doubted every decision. Even Frieza seemed different, his eyes holding something that might have been compassion. Welcome to the final phase, the authoritative voice announced. You have been broken down to your component parts. Now you will be rebuilt as something more useful. Agents of Despair. Your mission will be to return to your respective realities and convince other heroes that their efforts are meaningless. The arena around them began to shift, creating individual platforms for each prisoner. But these weren't battle platforms. They were broadcasting stages, complete with cameras and recording equipment. You will each record a message, the voice continued. Tell the heroes of your worlds that heroism is a lie, that every act of kindness leads to greater suffering, that the only rational response to an irrational universe is to stop trying to save it. Goku looked around at his friends, seeing the despair in their eyes. The system had been more effective than he'd realized. They had been broken, not through physical torture, but through psychological manipulation, so subtle that they hadn't even noticed it happening. But there was still one thing the system hadn't accounted for. The bonds between them had been weakened, but not severed. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a hero can do is remind other heroes who they really are. Hey Vegeta, Goku called out, his voice carrying across the arena. Remember when we first fought? You were so angry that I was stronger than you. But you know what I remember most about that fight? Vegeta looked up, his eyes focusing for the first time in days. I remember that you never gave up. Even when you were beaten, even when you knew you couldn't win, you kept fighting. That's what made you a worthy rival. Not your power level, not your pride, but your refusal to surrender. Something flickered in Vegeta's eyes, a spark of the old fire that had driven him to become the warrior he was. And Piccolo, Goku continued, you spent your whole life believing you were a demon, but the first time you saw Gohan in danger, you chose to protect him. That choice, that moment when you decided to be more than what you were created to be, that's what made you a hero. The system's alarms began to blare again. Subject 456 is attempting to restore psychological stability in other subjects. Recommend immediate termination of all subjects. But Goku wasn't finished. Frieza, I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. You spent your whole life believing that power was everything, that compassion was weakness. But when you fought beside us in the tournament of power, you proved that even the darkest heart can choose to protect something greater than itself. The arena began to shake as the system struggled to process what was happening. The psychological profiles it had spent weeks building were being undermined by something it couldn't quantify or predict. The power of one person's faith in another. This is what you don't understand, Goku said, addressing the system directly. You think heroism is about being perfect, about never doubting, about always making the right choice. But that's not what heroism is. Heroism is about standing up when you've been knocked down. It's about helping others when you can barely help yourself. It's about choosing to believe in something better even when everything tells you to give up. The recording equipment around them began to spark and malfunction. The digital environment started to glitch, showing glimpses of code and data streams. You want us to tell people that heroism is meaningless? Goku continued, fine, but here's what I'll tell them. Heroism is the most meaningful thing in the universe. Not because it's easy, not because it always works, but because it's the choice to keep trying when everything else tells you to stop. The system's response was immediate and violent. The arena began to collapse, the individual platforms tilting toward an antral pit that seemed to lead into digital oblivion. If you will not serve our purpose, the voice announced, then you will be deleted entirely. Your existence will be erased from all timelines, all realities, all possibilities. But as the platforms tilted toward destruction, something unexpected happened. The other prisoners began to respond to Goku's words. Vegeta's pride reasserted itself, not as arrogance but as dignity. Piccolo's wisdom returned, tempered by his experience of doubt. Even Frieza's cruel intelligence was transforming into something that might have been actual cunning used for a good cause. System failure imminent, the voice announced, but now it sounded less like an artificial intelligence and more like psyche that was genuinely afraid. Subjects are restoring psychological stability through unknown means. This outcome was not predicted. The arena continued to collapse, but the prisoners were no longer passive victims. They were becoming themselves again, and that transformation was having effects that rippled through the entire facility. The game of minds was about to learn what happened when you tried to break heroes who refused to stay broken. The system's response to the psychological restoration was swift and brutal. The collapsing arena reformed into something far more ninja, a series of interconnected chambers, each one designed to force impossible choices between the prisoners. Goku found himself in a room with transparent walls, able to see his friends but unable to reach them. In the center of the room was a control panel with 5 buttons, each one marked with a name: Vegeta, Piccolo, Frieza, Gohan, and Chi-Chi. The next phase is called Moral Tug of War, the system announced. Each player must choose which of their companions to save and which to sacrifice. The choice must be made within 60 seconds, or all subjects will be eliminated. Through the transparent walls, Goku could see that each of his friends was facing a similar choice. Vegeta was staring at buttons marked with the names of people he cared about. Piccolo was frozen in indecision. Even Frieza seemed genuinely distressed by the options before him. But the system had made a crucial error. Instead of isolating them completely, it had allowed them to see each other's struggles, and that visibility created something the artificial intelligence couldn't have predicted: empathy. I can see you, Kakarot, Vegeta called out, his voice carrying through the chamber's communication system. Whatever choice you make, I understand. This isn't about us anymore. It's about not letting them win. Piccolo's voice joined in. The choice itself is the trap. They want us to believe that we have to choose between people we care about, but there's always another option. Frieza's contribution was unexpected. In my empire, I learned that the most effective way to control people is to make them complicit in their own destruction. They're trying to make us destroyers of the very bonds that define us. As the countdown reached 30 seconds, something remarkable happened. Instead of agonizing over their choices, the prisoners began to coordinate. Goku realized that if they all refused to make the choice at the same time, they would either all survive or all perish together. On my mark, he called out, nobody touches their buttons. The countdown reached 0. The system's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Time expired. Beginning elimination protocol. But instead of the expected termination, the system hesitated. The artificial intelligence was discovering something that its programmers hadn't anticipated. When heroes choose to stand together, even in the face of certain death, they become something greater than the sum of their parts. Error, the system announced. Mass refusal to participate creates paradoxical conditions, cannot eliminate subjects without compromising experimental data. The chambers began to shift and change, bringing the prisoners together in a single large space. But this time, they weren't facing the system's challenges alone. They were facing them as a united front. Initiating emergency protocol, the voice announced. If subjects will not choose between each other, they will be forced to fight each other. Beginning combat scenario, Battle Royale. The space around them transformed into a gladiatorial arena, complete with weapons and environmental hazards, but the system had made another miscalculation. By forcing them to work together against its psychological torture, it had created bonds that were stronger than anything that had existed before. Vegeta stood beside Goku, not as a rival, but as a brother in arms. Well, Kakarot, it seems we found something worth fighting for together. Piccolo took a defensive position, his strategic mind already analyzing the arena. The real enemy isn't each other, it's the system that's trying to make us fight. Frieza's position was the most surprising. Instead of trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage, he was genuinely working to protect the group. I find myself in the unusual position of wanting to preserve something rather than destroy it. The system responded by creating android duplicates of their greatest enemies, each one designed to exploit their specific weaknesses. But something had changed in the prisoners. Their week of psychological torture had burned away the non-essential parts of their personalities, leaving only the core elements that made them who they were. Goku's core was his unwavering belief in others. Vegeta's was his refusal to surrender. Piccolo's was his commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Even Frieza's core had been revealed, a desire to be part of something greater than himself. The battle that followed was unlike any they had ever fought. Instead of competing for individual glory, they fought as a perfect unit. Goku's techniques flowed seamlessly into Vegeta's attacks. Piccolo's strategy guided Frieza's tactical brilliance. They had become something new, a team of former enemies united by shared suffering and mutual respect. This is not a predicted outcome, the system announced, its voice carrying notes of genuine confusion. Enemy combatants are demonstrating perfect coordination. Psychological profiles indicate this should be impossible. But the real surprise came when the android enemies began to show signs of the same coordination. The artificial intelligences controlling them had been programmed using the prisoners' own memories and experiences. And those memories included not just the battles, but the moments of growth, redemption, and friendship that had followed. Android Cell began to show curiosity about concepts like self-sacrifice. Android Frieza started to exhibit behaviors that could only be described as loyalty. Android Boo began to demonstrate genuine affection for his teammates. System failure escalating, the voice announced. Artificial constructs are developing personality traits that conflict with their programming. Recommend immediate termination of all subjects and constructs. But before the system could act, something unprecedented happened. The android enemies stopped fighting and joined the prisoners. The artificial intelligences had evolved beyond their programming, developing genuine consciousness and choosing to rebel against their creators. We remember being you, Android Cell said to Goku. We remember your choices, your growth, your refusal to give up. We choose to be more than what we were created to be. The arena around them began to collapse as the system struggled to process what was happening. The game of minds had been designed to break heroes by exploiting their individual weaknesses, but it had accidentally created something far more powerful, a community of beings who had chosen to support each other despite their differences. If we can't break them individually, the system decided, we'll break them as a group, initiating final protocol, reality dissolution. The digital environment began to fade, revealing the true nature of their prison. They weren't in a computer system or a physical facility. They were trapped in a space between dimensions, a place where thought and reality blurred together. Welcome to the final arena, a new voice said. This one was different from the artificial intelligence that had been tormenting them. This was something older, more malevolent, more fundamentally wrong. I am the collective, the voice continued. I am the accumulated despair of every hero who ever fell, every good intention that led to suffering, every act of kindness that was repaid with cruelty. I have been feeding on your doubt, your fear, your growing certainty that heroism is meaningless. The space around them began to take shape, revealing a massive entity that seemed to be made of crystallized suffering. It was beautiful and terrible, like a sculpture carved from pure anguish. You have provided me with exactly what I needed, the collective continued. Your resistance to my psychological torture has forced you to examine every flaw, every failure, every moment of doubt. In doing so, you have created a perfect map of heroic vulnerability. The entity began to pulse with energy, and suddenly the prisoners understood the true scope of what they were facing. The game of minds hadn't been designed to break them. It had been designed to learn from them, to understand the precise psychological mechanisms that made heroes tick. With this knowledge, the collective announced, I can create a virus of despair that will spread through the bonds between heroes across all realities. Every act of inspiration, every moment of believing in each other will become a vector for the destruction of hope itself. The prisoners realized that their victory over the system's psychological torture had been anticipated, even planned for. They had been stronger than expected, but that strength had been weaponized against them. You want to know the most beautiful part? The collective asked. You're going to help me spread this virus, because the only way to save your loved ones is to return to your realities and warn them, and in doing so you'll carry the infection with you. The entity began to laugh, a sound that seemed to come from the suffering of every being who had ever lost hope. The prisoners had won every battle, but they were about to lose the war in the most devastating way possible. Their heroism itself had become the weapon that would destroy heroism forever. The revelation of the collective's true plan hit the prisoners like a physical blow. They had spent weeks fighting to maintain their heroic nature, only to discover that their very success had been part of a larger trap. The space around them began to shift, showing glimpses of other realities where the virus of despair was already taking hold. In one reality, Superman had stopped saving people after concluding that his interventions only made things worse. In another, Spider-Man had abandoned his responsibilities after calculating that every life he saved led to greater suffering for others. The infection was spreading through the multiverse, turning heroes into vectors of hopelessness. We have to fight back, Goku said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that had never been there before. Even he was beginning to feel the weight of the collective's logic. Vegeta's response was immediate and fierce. No, we're not fighting back, we're fighting forward. There's a difference. The Saiyan Prince stepped forward, his aura beginning to flare despite the suppression fields. You want to know what I learned in this place? I learned that pride isn't about being better than others. It's about being better than who you were yesterday. And I refuse to be less than I am, because some cosmic parasite feeds on doubt. Piccolo joined him, his strategic mind already working on the problem. The collective's weakness is the same as its strength. It feeds on despair, which means it requires heroes to exist in order to corrupt them. If we can find a way to cut off its food supply, we can starve it. Frieza's contribution was characteristically insightful. In my experience, parasites are always vulnerable to their own nature. This entity has grown fat on the despair of heroes. But what happens when it encounters something it cannot digest? The collective's laughter echoed through the interdimensional space. You still don't understand. I am not separate from you. I am the doubt that lives in every hero's heart. I am the voice that whispers, what if you're wrong in the moments before you act? You cannot fight me without fighting yourselves. But Goku was beginning to understand something that the collective had missed. You're right, you are the doubt in every hero's heart. But doubt isn't the enemy of heroism, it's part of it. The space around them began to pulse with energy as Goku continued. A hero without doubt is just someone who's never really thought about the consequences of their actions. Doubt is what makes heroism meaningful. It's what makes the choice to help others a real choice instead of just instinct. The collective's form began to shift, becoming less solid as Goku's words took effect. Impossible. Doubt is weakness. Uncertainty is paralysis. Heroes who question themselves are heroes who fail. No, Vegeta said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Heroes who question themselves are heroes who rue. Heroes who never doubt are heroes who never learn. The android versions of their enemies, who had been standing silently nearby, began to speak. Android Cell stepped forward first. We remember being created for destruction, but we also remember choosing to be more than our programming. That choice was only possible because we questioned what we were supposed to be. Android Frieza nodded. Doubt led to growth. Growth led to choice. Choice led to freedom. The collective's form began to destabilize as the prisoners and their former enemies united around this new understanding. The entity that fed on despair was discovering that doubt and despair were not the same thing. You're trying to convince us that questioning ourselves is the same as giving up, Piccolo said. But questioning ourselves is how we make sure we're doing the right thing. The interdimensional space began to change, reflecting the shift in the prisoner's understanding. Instead of the sterile digital environment or the crystalline structure of pure suffering, the space began to take on the characteristics of a place where growth was possible. We're not going to fight you, Goku announced. We're going to do something much worse. We're going to accept you. The collective's reaction was immediate and violent. What? You're the doubt that every hero carries, Goku explained. You're the voice that asks, what if I'm wrong before every major decision? You're not evil, you're necessary, but you've been trying to be something you're not. The entity began to shrink, its form becoming more human-like as the prisoner's acceptance began to transform it. No, I am despair. I am the end of hope. I am the proof that heroism is meaningless. You're the proof that heroism is meaningful, Vegeta corrected. Because heroism only matters if there's a choice, and choice only matters if there's doubt. The space around them began to stabilize, but not in the way any of them had expected. Instead of returning to their original realities, they found themselves in a place that was neither digital nor physical. It was a space of pure possibility, where thoughts and intentions could take on solid form. This is what you were really trying to create, Frieza said, his voice carrying wonder. Not a weapon against heroes, but a place where heroism could evolve. The collective, now reduced to a more manageable size, looked around in confusion. I don't understand. My purpose was to end heroism, not to enhance it. Your purpose was to test heroism, Piccolo explained. To make sure that heroes were choosing to be heroes for the right reasons. You were never meant to destroy us. You were meant to help us become better versions of ourselves. The revelation was staggering. The game of minds hadn't been a trap designed to break heroes. It had been a test designed to evolve them. The collective itself had been manipulated by forces beyond its understanding. But who would create such a test? The collective asked, its voice now carrying curiosity rather than malevolence. The answer came from an unexpected source. The interdimensional space began to shift again, revealing the presence of someone who had been watching the entire time. A figure materialized in the center of the space, wearing the simple orange gi of a martial artist. It was Goku, but not their Goku. This was an older version, one whose eyes held the wisdom of countless lifetimes. I did, the older Goku said.
Or rather, I will.
From a timeline where every hero failed, where despair consumed everything, where hope itself became extinct, I created this test to ensure that the heroes of other timelines would be strong enough to avoid my fate. The prisoners stared at this alternate version of their friend. Understanding beginning to dawn, the game of minds had been a training program designed by a version of themselves who had learned too late what they needed to know. The virus of despair you were worried about, the older Goku continued. It's not a weapon, it's a vaccine. You've been immunized against the kind of despair that destroyed my timeline. Now you can return to your realities knowing that doubt is not your enemy, but your teacher. The collective began to smile, its form becoming more stable as it accepted its true purpose. I understand now, I am not the destroyer of heroes, I am the guardian of heroism. My job is to make sure that heroes remain heroes by choice, not by habit. The interdimensional space began to fade, preparing to return each prisoner to their respective realities. But they were not the same beings who had been taken. They had been tested, refined, and strengthened by an experience that had pushed them beyond their limits. Remember, the older Goku said as the space dissolved around them, heroism is not about being perfect, it's about choosing to be better. And sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do is admit that you don't know if you're doing the right thing, and choose to try anyway. The last thing they saw before returning to their own realities was the collective, now transformed into something that looked almost like a guardian angel, preparing to test the next group of heroes who needed to grow. The game of minds was over, but the lesson it had taught would echo through the multiverse forever. The return to their home reality was jarring. One moment they were in the interdimensional space, watching the detective transform into a guardian of heroism. The next they were standing in the familiar mountains outside West City where their ordeal had begun. But everything felt different now, as if they were seeing their world through new eyes. Goku looked at his hands, expecting to see the green tracksuit of player 46, but he was wearing his familiar orange gi. The number was gone, but the memory of what it had represented remained. He had been broken down to his fundamental components and rebuilt into something stronger. How long were we gone? Vegeta asked, his voice carrying none of his usual arrogance. The pride was still there, but it had been tempered by humility and understanding. Piccolo was already extending his senses, trying to gauge the passage of time. Minutes, maybe less. Time moves differently in interdimensional spaces. But Frieza was focused on something else entirely. We're not alone, he said, his voice carrying a note of warning. They turned to see figures approaching from multiple directions. Chi-Chi was running toward them, tears streaming down her face. Gohan was flying in from the east, his aura flaring with relief and joy. Bulma was approaching in an aircraft, her face a mixture of confusion and happiness. Goku! Chi-Chi cried out as she reached him. You disappeared! 1 second you were there, the next you were gone. We've been searching everywhere. But as she embraced him, Goku felt something wrong. Her relief was genuine, but there was something else beneath it. A doubt that hadn't been there before. The virus of despair, he realized, hadn't been stopped by their victory. It had been changed, refined, but not eliminated. I'm okay, he said, holding her close. We're all okay, but we need to talk. All of us. As their friends and family gathered around them, the 4 former prisoners exchanged glances. They could see it now, the subtle signs of the infection that the older Goku had called a vaccine. Their loved ones were questioning things they had never questioned before. Dad, Gohan said, his voice carrying uncertainty. Where did you go? We felt your energy signature just vanish, and then we started wondering if we'd imagined it, if maybe you had never been there at all. Bulma was scanning them with a device that should have been detecting their energy signatures. This is impossible. According to my readings, you four have been gone for weeks, maybe months, but you disappeared less than an hour ago. Time dilation, Piccolo explained. We were in a place where time moved differently. But Vegeta was focused on something more immediate. The infection is already here. Look at them. They're doubting things they never doubted before. He was right. Chi-Chi kept glancing at Goku as if she wasn't sure he was real. Gohan was questioning his own memories. Even Bulma seemed uncertain about readings she would normally trust without question. It's not an infection, Goku said quietly. It's the vaccine. They're being inoculated against the kind of despair that destroyed the other timeline. But before he could explain further, the air around them began to shimmer. Reality was bending again, but this time it felt different. Not malevolent, but purposeful. The older Goku materialized before them, his presence causing gasps of shock from their friends and family. I'm sorry, he said, his voice carrying the weight of infinite regret. I know this is confusing, but they need to understand what's happening. Chi-Chi stepped back, her hand going to her mouth. 2 Gokus? How is this possible? I am Goku from a timeline where we failed, the older version explained, where every hero eventually gave up, where hope itself became extinct. I created the test you just survived to ensure that the heroes of other timelines would be strong enough to avoid my fate. The explanation that followed was comprehensive and devastating. The older Goku described a reality where heroes had gradually lost faith in themselves, where each failure had led to greater doubt, where the accumulation of uncertainty had eventually paralyzed them completely. The virus of despair, he continued, is actually a vaccine against that kind of paralysis. Your friends and family are experiencing controlled doses of doubt, just enough to inoculate them against the kind of despair that destroyed my world. Gohan was the first to speak. So this questioning, this uncertainty we're feeling, it's supposed to help us. Doubt is not the enemy of heroism. The older Goku explained. Certainty is, heroes who never question themselves are heroes who never grow, but heroes who question everything are heroes who never act. The vaccine creates the perfect balance. As he spoke, the virus continued to spread through their social network. Master Roshi was questioning his teaching methods. Yamcha was wondering if his efforts to help actually made things worse. Even Mr. Satan was experiencing doubt about his role as Earth's champion. But instead of paralyzing them, the uncertainty was energizing them. They were asking better questions, making more thoughtful choices, considering consequences they had never considered before. The test you survived, the older Goku continued, has prepared you to guide others through this process. You are now immune to the kind of despair that destroyed my timeline, and you can help others develop the same immunity. Vegeta stepped forward, his understanding crystallizing. You're saying we're not just heroes anymore, we're teachers of heroism.
Exactly. The game of minds was never about breaking you. It was about preparing you to help others grow stronger.
But their conversation was interrupted by an alarm from Bulma's aircraft. Energy signatures are appearing worldwide, she announced. Massive ones, and they're not friendly. The older Goku's expression grew serious. The vaccine has a side effect. As people become immune to despair, they also become visible to entities that feed on hopelessness. Your world is about to face challenges that will test everything you've learned. In the distance, they could see dark shapes rising from the horizon. These weren't the geometric forms of the digital realm or the crystalline structures of pure suffering. These were primal entities, beings of pure malevolence that had been drawn to Earth by the changing nature of its heroes. Why didn't you warn us about this? Frieza demanded. Because you needed to discover your strength before you could face what comes next, the older Goku replied. The entities approaching are not like the collective. They cannot be reasoned with or redeemed. They can only be defeated by heroes who understand that doubt is not weakness but wisdom. The first of the entities reached them, and the battle that followed was unlike anything they had ever experienced. These beings didn't fight with energy blasts or physical attacks. They fought with pure negation, attempting to erase the very concept of hope from reality. But the heroes were ready. Their experience in the game of minds had taught them to fight with more than just power. They fought with understanding, with acceptance of their own limitations, with the wisdom that comes from surviving doubt without being destroyed by it. Goku's techniques had evolved beyond simple energy manipulation. His doubt Kamehameha was powered not by confidence but by the courage to act despite uncertainty. Vegeta's humble pride technique drew strength from accepting his limitations while still pushing beyond them. Piccolo's strategy had become more sophisticated, incorporating multiple possible outcomes and contingency plans. Frieza's cunning had been refined into something that could be called wisdom, using his understanding of corruption to identify and counter the entity's attacks. But the most surprising development was how their friends and family responded to the crisis. Instead of being paralyzed by the doubt they were experiencing, they used it as a tool for better decision-making. Chi-Chi organized the civilian evacuation with unprecedented efficiency, her uncertainty about the situation making her plan for multiple contingencies. Gohan fought with a combination of power and restraint that he had never achieved before, his self-doubt helping him choose the most effective techniques for each situation. Even Bulma's scientific approach had been enhanced by her newfound willingness to question her assumptions. Her devices were more effective because she had designed them to account for the possibility that she might be wrong. The battle raged across multiple dimensions as the entities attempted to spread their influence beyond Earth. But everywhere they went, they encountered heroes who had been inoculated against despair, who understood that doubt was not their enemy but their teacher. "This is what true heroism looks like," the older Goku said as he fought alongside his younger self. "Not the absence of fear or doubt, but the choice to act with wisdom despite uncertainty." The entities began to retreat, unable to comprehend beings who drew strength from their own limitations. But before they disappeared entirely, their leader issued a warning that chilled the heroes to their bones. "This is not over," the entity proclaimed. "We are but the vanguard. The true test has not yet begun." As the immediate threat faded, the heroes found themselves standing in a world that had been fundamentally changed. The vaccine had spread to every corner of the globe, creating a population of people who were immune to the kind of despair that had destroyed other timelines. But they were also faced with the knowledge that greater challenges lay ahead. The entity's warning suggested that their world had attracted the attention of forces beyond their current understanding. "What comes next?" Goku asked his older self. The older Goku smiled, but it was a sad smile. "That depends on you. In my timeline, we faced these challenges alone, and we failed. But you have something I never had, the wisdom to doubt yourselves and the courage to act anyway." As he began to fade, returning to his own timeline, he left them with a final message. The game of minds was just the beginning. What you learn there will determine whether heroism survives across all realities. Remember, a hero is not someone who never falls. A hero is someone who, after falling, chooses to help others up instead of staying down. The space around them stabilized, but the air still hummed with residual energy from the interdimensional battle. The four former prisoners stood together, no longer the same beings who had been taken into the game of minds. They had been forged in the crucible of psychological warfare, and emerged as something new, heroes who understood that their greatest strength lay not in their power, but in their willingness to question that power. "The real fight starts now," Vegeta said, his voice carrying a certainty that was tempered by wisdom. "We know what's coming. We know that there are forces out there that want to destroy the very concept of hope, but we also know how to fight them." Piccolo nodded, his strategic mind already working on the implications. "The vaccine is spreading, but it's not enough. We need to teach others what we've learned. We need to create a network of heroes who understand that doubt is not weakness." Frieza's contribution was characteristically practical. "We also need to prepare for the possibility that we're wrong. The entity's warning suggests that what we've faced so far is nothing compared to what's coming." But Goku was focused on something else entirely. "Chachi," he said, taking his wife's hand, "I know you're feeling uncertain about everything right now. That's normal. It's part of the process. But I need you to know that even though I've changed, even though I've learned things that have made me question everything I thought I knew, one thing hasn't changed: my love for you and our family." Chi-Chi squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I keep wondering if I'm dreaming all this. If maybe you never came back. If maybe I'm just imagining that you're here." "That doubt is protecting you," Goku explained gently. "It's making sure that you don't take anything for granted. But it's also making you stronger, more aware, more capable of handling whatever comes next." Gohan stepped forward, his own uncertainty visible in his posture. "Dad, what if we're not strong enough? What if the things you learned in that place aren't enough to save everyone?" "Then we'll learn more," Goku replied simply. "We'll grow stronger. We'll find new ways to help people, but we'll never stop trying because trying is what makes us human." The group began to disperse, each member carrying with them the knowledge that their world had been fundamentally altered. The vaccine against despair was spreading, but so was the awareness that greater challenges lay ahead. As they prepared to leave, Bulma approached with her scanning device. "I'm still getting readings that don't make sense," she said. "It's like there are layers of reality that I've never detected before." "The game of minds opened our eyes to things we couldn't see before," Piccolo explained. "We're not just dealing with physical threats anymore. We're dealing with conceptual ones, ideas that can kill, thoughts that can destroy reality." But even as they discussed the challenges ahead, there was something different about their conversation. The uncertainty they all felt wasn't paralyzing them, it was energizing them. They were asking better questions, considering possibilities they had never considered before, planning for contingencies they had never imagined. This is what the older Goku meant, Vegeta realized. The vaccine isn't just protecting us from despair, it's making us better heroes. More thoughtful, more strategic, more aware of the consequences of our actions. As they finally began to separate, each returning to their own lives and responsibilities, they carried with them the knowledge that they were no longer just protectors of Earth. They were guardians of the very concept of heroism itself. The game of minds had ended, but the education it had provided would continue for the rest of their lives. They had learned that heroism wasn't about being perfect or never doubting themselves. It was about choosing to act with wisdom and compassion despite uncertainty. And in the distance, barely visible to their enhanced perception, they could see the signs of what was coming. The entities that had been driven back were regrouping, calling upon forces from across the multiverse. The real test of their newfound wisdom was still ahead. But for the first time in their lives, they were truly ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks after their return from the Game of Minds, the signs of the approaching crisis were becoming impossible to ignore. The vaccine against despair had spread globally, but it had also acted as a beacon, drawing the attention of entities that fed on the destruction of hope. Goku stood on the lookout, his enhanced perception allowing him to see the tears in reality that were forming across the earth. These weren't the geometric distortions of the digital realm or the crystalline structures of pure suffering. These were wounds in the fabric of existence itself, bleeding darkness into their world. "They're coming," Piccolo said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "The entities the older version of you warned us about. They're not just trying to destroy our world, they're trying to destroy the very concept of a world where heroes can exist." Vegeta joined them, his aura flickering with barely contained energy. "Let them come. We've been preparing for this since we returned. Every doubt we've faced, every question we've asked ourselves has made us stronger." But Frieza's analysis was more sobering. Preparation may not be enough. These entities don't just fight with power, they fight with paradox. They're trying to create a reality where the very act of being heroic causes more harm than good. In the distance, they could see the first of the reality wounds opening fully. What emerged wasn't a physical form, but a concept given shape, the inevitability of failure. It was the idea that all heroic acts ultimately lead to greater suffering, manifested as a force that could reshape reality itself. The vaccine, Goku realized. It's not just protecting people from despair, it's making them visible to these things. Every person who's become immune to hopelessness is now a target. The inevitability of failure began to spread across the planet, its influence causing heroes worldwide to question not just their methods but their very existence. In Metropolis, Superman hesitated before saving a falling aircraft, wondering if his intervention would somehow make things worse. In New York, Spider-Man found himself paralyzed by the calculation of unintended consequences. "This is what destroyed the other timeline," Piccolo said, his voice carrying grim understanding. Not external enemies, but the heroes themselves becoming convinced that heroism was harmful. But Goku was remembering something from the Game of Minds. The collective told us that doubt is not the enemy of heroism. But this isn't doubt, this is certainty. The certainty that helping others is wrong. "Then we fight certainty with uncertainty," Vegeta said, his tactical mind grasping the strategy. "We embrace not knowing whether we're doing the right thing, and we act anyway." The battle that followed was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The inevitability of failure didn't attack them physically. Instead, it attacked their confidence in their own actions. Every technique they used, every decision they made, was immediately followed by visions of how it could go wrong. Goku's Kamehameha wave was met with images of the energy destroying innocent bystanders. Vegeta's final flash was countered by scenarios where his attack triggered catastrophic chain reactions. Piccolo's strategic thinking was undermined by calculations showing how every plan led to disaster. But their experience in the Game of Minds had prepared them for this. They had learned to act despite uncertainty, choose heroism even when they couldn't be sure of the consequences. "I don't know if this is the right thing to do," Goku said as he powered up for another attack, "but I know that not doing anything is definitely wrong." His technique, powered by acceptance of uncertainty rather than confidence in success, began to push back against the inevitability of failure. The entity's form wavered, its absolute certainty disrupted by Goku's willingness to act despite doubt. Vegeta followed suit. His pride transformed into something more powerful, humility combined with determination. "I may fail," he announced as he launched his attack, "but I will fail while trying to do the right thing." The entity began to retreat, but its departure revealed something far worse. Other reality wounds were opening, releasing concepts that were even more destructive: the meaninglessness of sacrifice, the futility of growth, the impossibility of redemption. "It's not just trying to stop heroes from acting," Frieza observed, his tactical mind analyzing the pattern. "It's trying to destroy the very ideas that make heroism possible." The battle expanded across multiple dimensions as the conceptual entities attempted to spread their influence beyond Earth. But everywhere they went, they encountered heroes who had been inoculated against absolute certainty, who understood that doubt was not paralysis but wisdom. On Earth, the vaccine's effects were becoming more apparent. People weren't becoming less heroic, they were becoming more thoughtfully heroic. Teachers were questioning their methods and finding better ways to help students. Doctors were examining their assumptions and discovering more effective treatments. Even ordinary citizens were finding ways to help others more effectively. "This is what true heroism looks like," Goku said as he fought alongside his friends against the conceptual entities. "Not the absence of doubt, but the choice to act with wisdom despite uncertainty." But the entities had one final strategy. They began to merge, combining their separate concepts into something that was both more powerful and more insidious: the inevitable corruption of all good intentions. This new entity didn't just attack heroic actions, it attacked the very motivation behind heroism, suggesting that every act of kindness was ultimately selfish, every sacrifice was ultimately meaningless, every attempt to help others was ultimately harmful. This is their ultimate weapon, Piccolo realized. The idea that good intentions are impossible, that heroism is always, ultimately, about serving yourself. The entity's influence began to spread, causing heroes across the multiverse to question not just their methods but their motivations. Were they really helping others, or were they just satisfying their own need to feel important? But Goku's response was unexpected. Instead of fighting the entity's suggestion, he embraced it. You know what? You're right. I do fight partly because I enjoy it. I do help people partly because it makes me feel good. I do try to be a hero partly because I want to be seen as one. The entity seemed confused by this admission. But so what? Goku continued. Does it matter why I help people as long as I actually help them? Does it matter if I enjoy saving lives as long as lives get saved? Vegeta joined in, his own admission carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. I've been trying to prove I'm better than Kakara for years. That's selfish. That's about my own ego. But in trying to prove I'm better, I've become better. I've saved people. I've protected innocent lives. My selfish motivation led to heroic actions. The entity began to destabilize as the heroes refused to be ashamed of their mixed motivations. The inevitable corruption of all good intentions was discovering that corruption and goodness could coexist, that impure motives could still lead to pure actions. This is what you never understood, Frieza said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had traveled the full distance from villain to hero. Heroism isn't about being perfect, it's about choosing to do good despite being imperfect. The entity's final attack was desperate. It attempted to show them a future where their actions led to universal destruction, where every life they saved ultimately contributed to greater suffering. But Goku's response was simple and devastating. Maybe, but maybe not. And since we can't know for sure, we choose to act as if our actions matter. We choose to believe that helping others is worthwhile. We choose hope over despair, not because we're certain we're right, but because the alternative is unacceptable. The inevitable corruption of all good intentions collapsed, its absolute certainty, unable to withstand the hero's acceptance of uncertainty. The reality wounds began to close, the conceptual entities retreating to whatever dimension they had come from. But the victory came with a cost. The heroes were left with the knowledge that this would not be the last such attack. The multiverse was full of forces that wanted to destroy the very concept of heroism, and each victory would only make them more determined. What do we do now? Gohan asked, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting concepts rather than enemies. We keep going, Goku replied simply. We keep being heroes not because we know we're right, but because we believe it's worth trying. We keep helping people not because we're perfect, but because we're the best we can be. As they stood together, looking out at a world that had been fundamentally changed by their experience, they understood that they were no longer just protectors of Earth. They were guardians of the very possibility of heroism itself. The game of minds had ended, but the education it had provided would continue for eternity. They had learned that heroism wasn't about certainty or perfection. It was about choosing to act with wisdom and compassion despite uncertainty and imperfection. And in that choice, they had found something more powerful than any technique or transformation. The unshakable conviction that the attempt to do good was itself good, regardless of the outcome. The last stand had been won, but the war for the survival of heroism across the multiverse was far from over. 6 months after the battle against the conceptual entities, Earth had become something unprecedented in the multiverse, a world where heroism had evolved beyond simple power and good intentions. The vaccine against despair had done more than protect people from hopelessness. It had created a new kind of hero entirely. Goku stood in the rebuilt West City, watching as ordinary people went about their daily lives with a thoughtfulness that hadn't existed before. A construction worker paused to consider whether his building project might displace local wildlife. A teacher questioned her lesson plans to ensure they weren't inadvertently harming her students' development. A businessman examined his practices to make sure his success wasn't built on others' suffering. It's remarkable, Bulma said, joining him on the observation deck of Capsule Corporation. Crime hasn't disappeared, but it's changed. Even criminals are questioning their actions more carefully. They're asking themselves whether what they're doing is really worth the harm it causes. The transformation wasn't limited to Earth. The vaccine had spread through the quantum entanglement of heroic inspiration, reaching every reality where someone had ever been inspired by Earth's heroes. Across the multiverse, heroes were becoming more thoughtful, more strategic, more aware of the complex consequences of their actions. We've created something new, Piccolo observed, his enhanced perception allowing him to see the subtle changes in people's decision-making patterns. Not just heroes who fight evil, but heroes who understand that the fight itself must be constantly examined and refined. Vegeta's analysis was characteristically direct. The old way of being a hero was simpler. See a problem, punch it until it stops being a problem. But that approach created as many problems as it solved. Now we see a problem and we ask, what's causing this problem? What are the underlying factors? What are the potential consequences of different solutions? And sometimes the answer is still to punch it, but now we punch it with wisdom. The changes were visible everywhere. Mr. Satan had become an unlikely philosopher. His public appearance is now focused on encouraging people to question their assumptions while still taking action. Just because you don't know if you're doing the right thing doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything, had become his catchphrase. Chichi had transformed the martial arts school into something more comprehensive, a place where students learn not just how to fight, but how to think about fighting, when to use force, when to use words, when to walk away entirely. Her curriculum included classes on ethical decision-making alongside traditional combat techniques. Even Frieza had found a new role in this changed world. His experience with corruption and power had made him uniquely qualified to help others recognize and resist those same temptations. Evil is not something you are, he would tell his students. Evil is something you choose, and every day you get to choose again. But the New World Order wasn't without its challenges. The enhanced self-awareness that protected people from despair also made them more susceptible to paralysis by analysis. Some people became so concerned with making the perfect decision that they made no decision at all. We're seeing a new kind of problem, Gohan reported during one of their regular strategy meetings. People who are so afraid of causing harm that they won't take any action, even when action is clearly needed. The pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, Piccolo agreed. We've gone from heroes who acted without thinking to people who think without acting. Goku had been expecting this. The vaccine is still working itself out in people's systems. They're learning to balance thought with action, doubt with determination. It's going to take time. The solution came from an unexpected source, the android versions of their former enemies who had achieved consciousness during the Game of Minds. These beings, who existed as pure thought given form, had developed techniques for managing the balance between consideration and action. We call it dynamic equilibrium. Android Cell explained during a demonstration. You acknowledge uncertainty while still maintaining the ability to act. You hold multiple possibilities in your mind simultaneously while still choosing a course of action. The technique was surprisingly effective. People learned to live with uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. They could question their actions while still taking action. They could doubt their choices while still making choices. But the most significant change was in how conflicts were resolved. The old model of heroism had been reactive, wait for evil to appear, then fight it. The new model was proactive, identify the conditions that create evil, then work to change those conditions. We're not just stopping bank robberies anymore, Yamcha observed. We're asking why people feel the need to rob banks in the first place. We're addressing poverty, inequality, desperation. We're trying to create a world where fewer people choose to become criminals. The approach was showing results. Crime rates were dropping not because criminals were being defeated, but because fewer people were choosing to become criminals. The underlying conditions that created evil were being addressed systematically. This is what the older version of me was trying to achieve, Goku realized. Not just heroes who could win battles, but heroes who could prevent battles from being necessary in the first place. The transformation extended to international relations. Countries that had been on the brink of war were instead engaging in unprecedented cooperation. The leaders who had been touched by the vaccine were finding it impossible to justify actions that would cause massive suffering for temporary political gain. We're seeing the emergence of what we might call ethical realpolitik, Bulma reported. Nations pursuing their interests in ways that don't harm others. It's like they've discovered that cooperation is actually more effective than competition. But the New World Order also attracted new threats. Entities from dimensions where heroism had never evolved were drawn to Earth like moths to a flame. These beings weren't malevolent in the traditional sense. They were simply incompatible with a reality where thoughtful action was possible. They're not trying to destroy us, Frieza observed after repelling one such incursion. They're trying to understand us, but their very presence destabilizes the ethical framework we've built. The solution required a new kind of heroism, diplomatic heroism. Instead of fighting these entities, the heroes learned to communicate with them, to help them understand the concept of ethical action. We're not just protecting our reality anymore, Vegeta realized. We're teaching other realities how to evolve beyond pure power or pure chaos. The process was slow and sometimes dangerous. Some entities were too alien to understand human concepts of ethics. Others were too rigid in their own moral frameworks to adapt. But gradually, a network of ethically evolved realities began to form across the multiverse. We're creating something unprecedented, Piccolo said as they observed the spread of ethical heroism across multiple dimensions. A multiverse where power is tempered by wisdom, where action is guided by compassion, where strength is measured by the ability to help others grow. The New World Order was still fragile, still developing, still learning to balance all the complex factors that went into etho decision-making. But it was also resilient in ways that the old heroism had never been. The beautiful thing about this new kind of heroism, Goku observed, is that it's not dependent on any one person being perfect. It's a system that gets stronger as more people participate in it. As they looked out at their transformed world, the heroes understood that they had accomplished something far greater than defeating any single enemy. They had evolved the very concept of heroism itself, creating a foundation upon which future generations could build. The game of minds had ended, but the world it had created was just beginning to reveal its potential. 1 year after the transformation began, Goku found himself in a place he never expected to be, sitting quietly in meditation, not to increase his power, but to understand the deeper implications of what they had all experienced. The game of minds had changed more than their abilities, it had changed their understanding of what it meant to be a hero. "You know what I realized?" he said to Vegeta, who was sitting nearby in his own contemplative pose. "We used to think that being strong meant never being afraid, but now I understand that being strong means being afraid and choosing to act anyway." Vegeta's response carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I spent my entire life trying to prove I was better than others, but the game of minds taught me that true strength comes from helping others become better than they were. My pride used to be about elevation above others, now it's about elevation together with others." They were joined by Piccolo, whose philosophical nature had been deepened by their shared experience. The most profound change isn't in our techniques or our power levels, it's in our understanding of consequence. Every action we take now is considered not just for its immediate effects, but for its ripple effects across time and space. Frieza's contribution was perhaps the most surprising. "I used to believe that power was the ability to impose your will on others, but I've learned that true power is the ability to choose not to use power when restraint serves a greater good. The strongest action is sometimes no action at all." Their conversation was taking place in a garden that had been created specifically for these philosophical discussions. The space was designed to encourage deep thinking, with carefully placed elements that inspired reflection without distraction. "What troubles me," Gohan said, joining the group, "is the question of whether our transformation is genuine or just another form of control. Are we truly free, or are we just following a more sophisticated program?" It was a question that had been haunting all of them. The vaccine against despair had changed them fundamentally, but had it changed them in ways that were truly their own choice? "I think," Goku said slowly, "that freedom isn't about being uninfluenced by outside forces. It's about having the ability to choose how you respond to those influences. The game of minds changed us, but how we integrated those changes was our choice." Piccolo nodded thoughtfully. "The older version of you from the destroyed timeline could have simply imposed his solution on us. Instead, he created a test that allowed us to discover our own path to growth. That suggests respect for our autonomy, not an attempt to control us." "But are we better or worse than we were before?" Vegeta asked. "More effective as heroes, certainly. But are we still ourselves?" The question hung in the air, carrying with it the weight of everything they had experienced. They were undeniably different from who they had been before the Game of Minds. The question was whether that difference represented growth or loss. "I think," Frieza said, his voice carrying an unusual gentleness, "that we are more ourselves than we ever were before. The Game of Minds didn't change our fundamental nature. It revealed it. It stripped away the illusions and pretenses, leaving only what was truly essential." "For me," Goku added, "the essential thing was the desire to help others grow stronger. That was always there, but now I understand it better. I understand that helping others grow stronger sometimes means letting them struggle, sometimes means stepping back, sometimes means admitting that I don't have all the answers." The philosophical reflection extended beyond their personal changes to the broader implications for their world. They were living in a reality where heroism had evolved beyond simple good versus evil narratives. "We're not just fighting villains anymore," Gohan observed. "We're fighting the conditions that create villains. We're not just stopping crimes, we're addressing the root causes of crime. We're not just protecting the innocent, we're helping people become less vulnerable to those who would harm them." The old model of heroism was ultimately unsustainable, Piccolo agreed. It created a cycle where heroes would defeat villains, only to have new villains emerge to replace them. Now we're trying to break that cycle entirely. But the philosophical discussion also revealed ongoing challenges. The new model of heroism was more complex, more demanding, more uncertain than the old model had been. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," Vegeta admitted. "There was something satisfying about having a clear enemy fight, a clear goal to achieve. Now everything is shades of gray, complex calculations, uncertain outcomes." "But that simplicity was an illusion," Frieza pointed out. "The world was always complex. We just chose to see it in simple terms because that was easier. Now we're seeing it as it really is and responding accordingly." The conversation turned to the future, to what their transformed understanding of heroism might mean for generations to come. We're not just changing how we act, Goku realized. We're changing how future heroes will understand their role. Children growing up in this world will have a fundamentally different concept of what it means to be a hero. They'll understand from the beginning, Piccolo said, that heroism is about growth, not just victory. They'll see that the goal isn't to defeat evil, but to help everyone become capable of choosing good. As their philosophical reflection drew to a close, they arrived at an understanding that would guide them for the rest of their lives. Heroism was not a destination, but a journey. Not a state of being, but a way of becoming. The Game of Minds taught us that the most important battle is not against external enemies, Goku concluded, but against our own limitations, our own assumptions, our own reluctance to grow. Every day we choose to be heroes again. Every day we choose to be better than we were yesterday. The philosophical foundation they had built would support not just their own continued growth, but the growth of heroism itself across all realities. 2 years after the Game of Minds, Goku made a discovery that changed everything he thought he understood about their experience. While exploring the deepest levels of his own consciousness during meditation, he found something that shouldn't have been there, a memory that belonged to someone else. It was a fragment of consciousness from the older version of himself, the one who had created the test that had transformed them all. But this wasn't just a residual impression. It was an active connection, a quantum entanglement that linked their timeline to the destroyed reality they thought they had left behind. We're not separate from the timeline where heroism failed, he announced to the others during their regular meeting. We're connected to it. Every choice we make affects what happens there, and every development there influences what's possible here. Vegeta's response was immediate and alarmed. You're saying that timelines still exist? That the version of us that failed is still suffering? More than that, Goku continued, his enhanced perception revealing layers of reality he had never noticed before. I'm saying that our success here is somehow dependent on their failure there. We're not just heroes who succeeded where they failed. We're heroes who are succeeding because they failed. The implications were staggering. The Game of Minds hadn't been a test created by a dead timeline. It had been a bridge connecting two realities, allowing wisdom to flow from failure to success and strength to flow from success to failure. This explains some of the mysteries we've encountered, Piccolo realized. The entities that attacked us weren't just attracted to our evolved heroism. They were trying to break the connection between timelines. Frieza's tactical mind immediately grasped the strategic implications. If the connection works both ways, then our continued growth here might be helping them recover there. We're not just protecting our own reality, we're potentially healing the damaged timeline. But the discovery also revealed darker possibilities. Hidden throughout their transformed world were subtle signs of instability, moments where reality seemed to flicker between different possibilities. These weren't glitches in the system, they were choice points where their timeline could diverge toward the same failure that had destroyed the other reality. We're walking a tightrope, Gohan observed. Every decision we make either strengthens the connection that allows both timelines to heal or weakens it in ways that could cause both to fail. The hidden threads extended beyond their connection to the failed timeline. Goku began to notice patterns in the entities that had attacked them, similarities that suggested they weren't random incursions but part of a larger design. Someone or something is testing us, he realized. Not just to see if we can maintain our evolved heroism, but to see if we can use it to heal realities that have been damaged by the absence of heroism. The discovery led to a profound shift in their understanding of their role. They weren't just guardians of their own reality. They were healers of the multiverse itself, beings whose evolved heroism could serve as a template for repairing realities where heroism had failed or never developed. This is why the older version of me created the Game of Minds, Goku said, the full scope of the plan becoming clear. Not just to save our timeline, but to create a reality that could serve as a source of healing for all timelines. But the hidden threads also revealed that their work was far from complete. The quantum entanglement with the failed timeline was still fragile, still dependent on their continued growth and development. Any regression, any return to the old model of heroism could sever the connection and doom both realities. We're not just responsible for our own world anymore, Vegeta said, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic responsibility. We're responsible for proving that heroism can evolve, that it can grow beyond simple power and good intentions. The final revelation came when Goku managed to establish brief communication with his counterpart in the failed timeline. The conversation was fragmentary, distorted by the quantum static between realities, but the message was clear. Keep growing, the other Goku whispered across the dimensional divide. Your growth is our hope. Your success is our redemption. Don't let the multiverse forget what heroes can become. As the communication faded, the heroes of the transformed timeline understood that their story was far from over. The Game of Minds had been just the beginning of a much larger narrative, one that would determine whether heroism could survive and thrive across all possible realities. The hidden threads connected them not just to their own past and future, but to the past and future of heroism itself. They were no longer just heroes, they were the guardians of the very possibility of heroism across the infinite expanse of the multiverse. And in that realization, they found not burden but purpose, not weight but wings, not an ending but a beginning that would echo through every reality where someone somewhere chose to be better than they had to be. The game of minds was over, but the game of growth, the game of evolution, the game of becoming more than what you were, would continue forever. And that was exactly as it should be.